So we have gathered here, my dear friends, to talk about Leon Surmelian and his work. And as you see, our course page of language zone classroom, we have prepared together with Armenian Institute materials for you. You can find here chapters of the book. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, also his other works. And in case you want to purchase books, you can find here the links when you can go and find the books online, in online shops and on Kindle. And today, together with the members of Armenian Institute, we are going to discuss the book itself, of course, and his other works. Dear Datevik, please.
Let me switch to English, and welcome to people who have just joined, and thank you very much to everyone who is staying from the previous section, and thank you to Armenian Virtual College and whole team for inviting us. It's a very exciting opportunity, very excited to be here to share our latest publication with you. I'd like to say a few words about Armenian Institute. We are a small charity based in London for about 20 years. We run a wide range of cultural and art activities, events, film screenings, book launches, exhibitions, you name it. Last half a year we've been confined to Zoom. It didn't stop us. We've been cooking and dancing on Zoom as well. I would encourage you to check our website, armenianinstitute.org.uk. And I'm very privileged here to be here with my fantastic colleagues. Dr. Stepan Sargsyan, you've met in the previous section, who presented the Armenian part with me. And the English section will be run by Dr. Susan Patty, who is one of the founders of the Institute and the former director. She's an anthropologist, and she'll talk about Surmelian and his book. And Susan will be accompanied by Richard Anushan, who has just disappeared. So I hope he'll be back. Richard Anushan is our treasurer of Armenian Institute, and he has been the driving force behind this publication. It was his idea, his energy to have this fantastic book republished, and I have to mention with gratitude that Richard has also financed the whole project. And oh, he's just back on time. Richard, you missed the introductions. Anyway, I'll stop here. I've been talking more than enough, and Susan, Richard will lead the English section with a little bit of help from us if needed.
Very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, everyone. I'd like to just take a few moments to share with you a little bit about the journey that went behind the republication of this book. Give you also provide some historical context, and then just finish off with why is this so special? Why did we get so excited about this book? Okay. So first, the journey. Years ago, I was given a first edition of Leon Surmelian'S, I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen. And the first thing that drew my attention was a handwritten note inscribed on the flyleaf by the previous owner. And I quote, "A most interesting and almost certainly true story of an Armenian boy from Trabzon who, after losing both his parents in the 1915 deportations and massacres, eventually ended up in the USA." Okay. I discovered that the previous owner, Sir Dennis Arthur Wright, was the former British ambassador to Iran, who interestingly happened to have served as vice consul in Trabzon in the 1940s. Although I was familiar with Leon Surmelian, the second thing that crossed my mind was the question, why had I never come across this book before? Furthermore, in canvassing friends and colleagues involved in Armenian and Ottoman studies, they too were not aware of this book. So I was soon drawn into the personal journey of a 9-year-old boy, a heartwarming autobiographical account presented in beautiful prose. I learned that the out-of-print book, first published in 1945, and a bestseller in its time, was internationally acclaimed and translated into many languages. So the objective, the mission. In working with the Armenian Institute, we decided to bring back into publication this long forgotten masterpiece for the benefit of new generations. The first thing that we needed some guidance on, obviously, was the copyright. And here we got some guidance from the original publishers, E.P. Dutton, Penguin Books, the author's estate, and then finally the AGBU. And once we got the green light to go ahead with a republication, a small team was assembled. And the strategy was essentially twofold: to remain utterly faithful to the author's original text, while at the same time to provide the all-important historical context with an attention to detail. And what do I mean by historical context? An updated preface to demonstrate how this book is still relevant in 2020. Maps outlining the journey of a 10-year-old boy through the Ottoman and Russian empires in World War I. A glossary of terms: Armenian, Turkish, Greek. And finally, photographs. The all-important photographs which provide that visual record of the people and places mentioned in the book. And here we got lucky as well in one of our meetings with our friends at Aras Publishing in Istanbul, who incidentally had published a Turkish version language of this 5 years ago. They put us in touch with a senior member of the family, the author's niece, Hasmik Surmelian. She's a concert pianist in Canada. And over a 12-month period, we corresponded, and she shared with us family photographs, captions, narratives, context, which were so important now to provide, which added to all the pages of the book there. In addition to the family photographs, we also wanted to include some images of Trabzon, which again were so important to the author, both in pre-1915 multicultural Trabzon, which he describes so beautifully in chapters 1 through 4, as well as post-1915 when he goes back in chapter 10, where he visits the Armenian church, which is now warehousing all of the confiscated and abandoned Armenian properties. We paid special attention to the cover design, and even something as may appear to be insignificant to the reader, but something that was very important to the author. We wanted to highlight a recurring motif throughout the book, and that was the flower, the tears of the Virgin. We benefited from some very powerful endorsements, and it was mentioned earlier as well. As the book gets out into the public domain, we continue to be surprised by little gems that we didn't know about before. For instance, as it was mentioned by Yerevant and friends in chapter 20, when he does get his send-off in Constantinople by his brother and friends, the fellow Ashod is constantly mentioned, and we learned that was Ashod Zoryan, the famous painter. About historical context, because I think it's important that this book was not just for the Armenian community, but as I mentioned, it was a bestseller in its time. Trabzon. Trabzon was an important Ottoman port city on the Black Sea. Like many port cities, its population comprised of a mosaic of peoples of different cultures, ethnicities, and religions. Political forces at work then. When Leon Surmelian was a child, the 19th century had recently passed into history, and the once great Ottoman Empire was undergoing a long, severe decline, with the loss of possessions and facing a host of political, economic, and social challenges. How does the Surmelian family fit in this now? The Surmelian'S were a middle-class, urban, extended family headed by an entrepreneurial patriarch, a pharmacist. They were well integrated into the fabric of the multicultural Trabzon society. Of financially comfortable means, education for both men and women was valued and emphasized. So why is this book so special? Why do we all become so passionate about getting this book out there again? Surmelian'S book is perhaps the most beautifully and lucidly rendered of the various autobiographies that narrate the experience of the Armenian genocide and its after effects. Among the many inspirations that guided us throughout the republication was the author's own description of his work, and I quote, "I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is strictly a factual story, the literal truth about my boyhood. I should like to see it publicized as the universal story, the timeless legend of boyhood. To regard it in any other light is to miss its point and significance. So, as a timeless story of millions of refugee children around the world, the work is as relevant today as when it was published." Tatvik. Tatvik, that's it. Yes.
I think I'm coming up next.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just going to follow up on some of what Richard was saying and connect it with some of Leon Surmelian's other prose works. We'll rely on Gagik later on to say a bit about his poetry. Leon Z. Surmelian was known as Zaven throughout his childhood, and apparently until he began to write seriously in English. Then he took on the name of his uncle, a man whose politics his father disagreed with, but on whom he relied for protection when needed. The uncle, like Zaven, was a man of utopian dreams, a fearless hero in Zaven's words, and the change of name showed his affection for the man and his idealism. All this speaks to Surmelian's own relationship with his past, something that is explored in depth in I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen. With love, humor, and intensity of feeling, he manages to write of tragedy and of events on large and very small scale, each drawing the reader into the experience. I'll just say a few words by way of biography before going on about his ideas. And I'm going to try to share my screen, although I see I'm not the speaker thing. I don't know. Let's see what happens.
You have permission to share. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Good. So this is the cover of our new book, which I guess everybody has seen. And here we have Trabzon. So Surmelian was born in 1905 in Trabzon, as Richard said, a multicultural port city on the Black Sea in the Eastern Ottoman Empire. This is a picture from which you, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up with what we saw of the Armenian time and just now. This is a picture of his family before the genocide. His mother on the left-hand side, child on her lap. Leon in the white shirt, I believe, with his sisters and brother Onik. When his parents were forced onto the deportations in 1915, they found different homes for his three siblings, but Zaven was forced out with other relatives beside him. He was soon siphoned off the marches to be sold in a slave market for young boys, but he managed to escape and began a several-year career of solo wandering. We have two maps in our book, which are the main reason for having them is to show you where he went, because it's quite amazing what he did. Trabzon you see here on this map. The march took him to Cevizlik, which is there to the south inland, and he escaped going to Kirichhana. Zephanos was a family summer house. Go on to the next map. He took no, I can't tell you that Datovik told you this in the Armenian one, so I'm going to say sorry. The boy, then of 10, 11, 12 years old throughout this travel, went to all of the places that you see on this map, and actually not in some kind of order that you might imagine. Crisscrossing borders going all over the place, twice to Istanbul, Constantinople, and back to Trabzon several times. So it's quite astonishing. This is a picture taken in 1920. So he ended up, when the war was over, in Constantinople. And from there, he won a scholarship to study in America. And it's here, Richard has already mentioned, that his brother Onik, also pictured here, made friends, was a classmate of Ashod Zoryan. And I hope Yerevan will share with us later on something about his uncle. I'm just going to read a tiny bit because he is actually not only mentioned in here in the book, but he was quite significant in Surmelian'S initial choice to be a poet. Evidently, Ashod and another boy named Vaharam were very good poets and really looked down on Leon at that time. Ashod was the Apollo of our school, a sensitive, handsome dreamer who always carried Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal in his coat pocket like a prayer book, and was given to murmuring melodic lines to himself. But I had not read Baudelaire, nor Verlaine, Mallarmé, Flaubert, Proust, and so he showed no interest in me, though he did not deliberately and savagely cut me as did Vaharam. So typical school relationships. But what he took this was as a prodding to do better. So his chosen field initially was poetry, and that helped him to get a scholarship to America. However, agriculture became what he believed he must follow. And so he goes, because he wanted to make Armenia, he wanted to come back and make Armenia self-subsistent and productive. So though others counseled him otherwise, he went to Kansas to study, and after a year of great loneliness, he found himself and also a feeling of new home, though not a homeland, through his gracious hosts on an isolated Kansas farm during a summer stay. Surmelian, not one for staying in one place, eventually ended up in Los Angeles, where with the help of Ruben Mamoulian's mother, he met the great director and began a career of writing for Hollywood magazines and papers, as well as some script writing, and eventually his best known work, I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen, which he's here showing to Clark Gable. His life in Hollywood included friendships with stars, but he continued a parallel life with Armenian friends, and his writings reflect his unending fascination with the world he calls My Armenia. Other works include essays and in book form 98.6 Degrees, almost certainly based on his own experience struggling with tuberculosis. The Daredevils of Sassoon, his retelling of the great legends, of the great Armenian legends, and then Apples of Immortality, which is 40 Armenian folktales gathered by others in Armenia, but he has retold them and retold and translated them. His nonfiction work, Techniques of Fiction Writing, Measure and Madness, became a popular book for creative writing classes and contains many revealing references to his own work, as well as a panorama of historical and contemporary fiction as examples. Measure and Madness is an apt reference to his own life and work, with his concern for finding structure within chaos, with proper respect for both. Surmelian died in 1995 in California. There are many reasons to read I Ask You, Ladies and Gentlemen, and to be interested in its author, Leon Zaven, Surmelian. This book and the author's thoughts, as expressed in his other works, have relevance today in several ways, some of which Richard has already mentioned. The most obvious is his portrayal of his own experiences as a young refugee, escaping death on multiple occasions, crisscrossing borders, traveling long distances, and finally sailing to a new life in the United States. Some people reading the book cannot quite believe that Surmelian could have done all that he claims to have done, nor could he have covered the territory he says he did. But I would ask people to please turn on their evening news and see what refugee children are doing today across the world. A boy of 10, when the deportations came to his town, he was just old enough to accept the independence thrust upon him, but young enough not to be perceived as an immediate threat. Some people, children among these, have a certain combination of luck, timing, opportunities, and personality, and usually, as with Zaven, with the help of others, are able to make their way through what the world has thrust upon them. Léon Surmelian was one of these children, and he managed by obeying orders occasionally, dodging them at other times, pretending to be a Greek or another ethnicity, stowing away on anything that moved, and making friends wherever he went. Surmelian was a true child of that time, place, and particular class. His father, a successful pharmacist, his father's mother, his nene, illiterate, but the family storyteller, passing on tales that would stay with Surmelian all his life. Neighbors, Greek and Turkish, and others feature prominently in the early chapters and later on. A multicultural city, Trabzon provided space for living apart and working and playing together. Armenians, like their compatriots around the Ottoman Empire, learned several languages and often more. Surmelian spoke Armenian, Turkish, and Greek fluently, and he learned several as a child, He spoke Armenian, Turkish, and Greek fluently as a child and quickly learned Russian later on and ended up writing beautifully in English once established in America. This multilingual facility was part of being Armenian at that time in that place and was just an accepted way of being. And thus the second point of relevance of this book today that I'm going to mention, there are many points, is that of Surmelian's attitude towards others and othering. For Surmelian, it was not a matter of forgetting or leaving behind his identity as an Armenian, but rather looking into the beating heart of the new person, of the new country. Curiosity, rather than staying with his initial judgment or impression. For him, the answer to identity is in the earth that feeds the people, perhaps a concept not too far from the French terroir. Surmelian considers the proximity of the Armenian words ho and hok, or hoki, noting how close their translations are to each other in English, soil and soul. And I'm going to read just a small paragraph from his experience in Kansas, where he comes to the realization that he can belong to this place. Maybe I won't. Yeah. What is it? This is after a summer stay in Kansas, where he arrived thinking utterly out of place for a whole year before that. What is it that soldiers fight and die for? What is it that makes nations? Language, history, traditions, political organizations. These are contributing factors, yes, but fundamentally it is the land, a common identity with the earth, with dandelions and moonlight and crickets and the crackling of young corn in the morning breeze. That summer, I saw how the sun made love to the earth in the Missouri Valley, and how from that love poured forth rivers of golden grains. I heard the droning of bees among wildflowers in the stillness of the moon, the sound of the woodpecker. I listened to the song of bread, sung by millions of invisible lips in miles of scented wheat fields at night. America flowed into my blood, the earth and the sun, the wind and the rain, the moon and the stars of America were within me. In an essay that he wrote, M. Farid, set in Nebraska, although it seems to be very possibly autobiographical also. Surmelian pictures a young Armenian learning agriculture at university, meeting up with other foreign students. With hesitation, he makes friends with an Egyptian who eventually wants to accompany Surmelian to church on Sunday. On their way, Surmelian gives Farid a short summary of Christianity, and his own mind also wanders back to when he himself was once afraid to step inside this congregational church. Now he was relaxed. Quote, I felt at home in this Protestant church, and the old fears and prejudices were gone. The soullessness of America used to bother me in those days, and now I had to admit I was less concerned with it. This soullessness was not peculiar to America, but a sign of the modern industrial age spreading to other parts of the world, although here the contact between soul and soil was not fully established yet, unquote. In this essay, Surmelian comes to terms with his deeply felt animosity towards anyone sharing the Muslim faith of the Ottomans who destroyed his family and homeland. In his own summarizing of the Christian faith for Farid, he concludes that the basic principle is that of love. He also finds he has much in common with Farid, with Jalal, and others from the Middle East on his campus. At the same time, he's also made aware that nominal Christianity does not automatically make one a lover of all humankind. His new friend, Farid, meets prejudice in their town. And in another essay, The Sombrero, Surmelian himself is witness to the degrading discrimination against Mexicans. David Colon calls Surmelian a modern romantic, writing in tones full of emotion. But he also agrees that Surmelian is not blind to complexities, contradictions, his own or other Armenian shortcomings. While admiring and appreciating his new country, America, he is repulsed by the racism and prejudice observed and at times encountered firsthand. While embracing his new life and continuing to make the most of his gifts and opportunities, the past and his Armenia have a vivid life in his heart and soul. Colon notes that Surmelian continually writes of the past and present in counterpoint, just as they are present in his imagination, in an effort to quote, save the memory of sacred time, unquote, retrieving past glories and bringing them into the present. Finally, what distinguishes Surmelian's book is its lyrical quality, as William Sororian wrote in the original introduction. There are now many memoirs of the Armenian genocide, again, as Richard mentioned, each informative and moving in its own way, but it is rare to find a memoir of such universal appeal, one that speaks both to the intellect and the heart, one that reaches out beyond the individual's experience. Surmelian's memoir is also different in that his descriptions of life in Kansas and afterwards are equally packed with emotion and consequence. Many memoirs at this point go on to list the achievements of the writer in the new country, writing in a suddenly plodding fashion about where he worked and so on. Surmelian leaves this out and switches to a philosophical discussion with whomever will take part, his readers, himself, his absent family and friends. And I'm quoting from chapter 24 now. But I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, what can I do when once upon a time the world was no larger than the little side street where I was born, where I led my armies to incredible victories on my spirited broomstick horse, when stalwart men in hobnail shoes sold vegetables carrying primitive weighing instruments with pebbles of various sizes and for weights, and sang the praises of their string beans and eggplants and tomatoes and artichokes in booming, hearty voices. And beautiful village women wearing costumes like Byzantine frescoes cried, "Chinochala," as they came into the city to sell milk and yogurt, carrying on their backs baskets loaded with clay pitchers and jars of classic forms. I ask you, what can you do on New Year's Eve in free and happy America when your playmates and schoolmates, the kids you grew up with, your companions in grief and joy, in hunger and misery, fellow dreamers during your dream age, are gone, lost? I must forget my past, the New Year's of long ago. I'm an American citizen, sincerely attached to the Constitution, and I'll fight for America anytime. But I ask you, how can a guy forget his childhood? There are millions like me tonight in free, happy America, haunted by their early years, which are always everywhere the happiest. The world is full of sorrow and memories, of stories that cannot be told, of poignant images that have no stories. Forgive me, ladies and gentlemen. I must have another drink. Thank you. I'm going to turn over to Gagik first, and then we will turn to Yervant, if he's willing, afterwards to say a few words about Onik and Ashod together. Gagik is going to tell us about Leon, actually he was then Zaven Surmelian, I believe, his poetry, his first literary successes. Gagik, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. I'll be very brief because Surmelian's poetry period was very brief. He became a poet almost by accident. The 15-year-old wanted to show off at high school, and he chose poetry. In his book, he describes it as the great hoax, but it worked. Hagop Oshagan, the fastidious literary critic, who was in the habit of bringing down established literary figures from their pedestals, was a teacher at Surmelian'S high school. Uncharacteristically, he was greatly impressed by the teenagers' poems and proudly presented them to the poet Vahan Tekeyan. It was Tekeyan who published this collection of 21 poems in Paris in 1924. The book's title was Luis Zwart, Joyous Light, chosen by Tekeyan to announce the entry of a new name into the world of Armenian literature. This slim volume contains poems of unequal quality, although Tekeyan was unreservedly full of praise for Surmelian'S verses, emphasizing their depth and form. Indeed, the poems give a foretaste of Surmelian'S worldview, literary passions, and aesthetic orientations. Some poems appear to be infused with the lyricism of Misak Metzaren'S and Tekeyan himself, naturally. In my view, however, the strongest amongst them are crystallized manifestations of the young author's emotional state. They are his poems, depicting the prematurely matured inner world of a teenager with the true talent of a lyrical poet. As we have heard already, after his arrival in the United States, Surmelian cut all ties with muses of poetry and devoted all his literary talent to prose. He left poetry, but poetry didn't leave him. In the words of William Saroyan, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is almost a lyric poem. Thank you. Over to Yervant, perhaps?
Yes, please. If we could hear from Yervant, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, mine is not a literary part, but it is a nice coincidental part. It's a discovery part through this beautiful book. First, I'd like to thank Datevi for introducing me to the book itself, the what it has done. I knew about Surmelian as an American Armenian author, but I didn't know him as part of this particular book, the bestseller, because it was not in print. So I'm thankful to the Institute for doing the reprinting of it. But my first interest is when Dr. mentioned that he is an Armenian orphan who came through a beautiful childhood in Trabzon. And Trabzon clicked because my family comes from Trabzon as well. And my grandfather, who I never met, I carry his name, but he grew in Trabzon when he was a child. He spoke with his neighbors in Greek. He enjoyed the beautiful multicultural city, a trade city between Persia and Russia. My great-grandfather was in trade himself. But gladly, my grandfather escaped. In 1905, he escaped in the sense that his father, his older brother in that case, his father was already massacred during the Sultan Abdulhamid 1895 massacres, unfortunately. But Apik Zoryan, his older brother, sent him to Beirut in 1905 to continue his studies. He was educated in Anatolia College near Trabzon, but he continued his studies in Beirut. Therefore, he escaped. But his childhood was in Trabzon, and I wanted to know a little bit more about Trabzon. And this book gave me such a nice feel as if I was living myself in Trabzon during those days before the genocide. And 1905 coincided also the year when Zaved Surmelian was born, and his childhood was during that time. So it's a nice coincidence. But at the same time, that was the same year that Ashot Zoryan, my uncle, was born also in Trabzon. So I'm sure they have met, they have done things together during that time. The book doesn't speak about that, and I had no recollection of that. But lots of discoveries about Trabzon. I was myself there last year before I met that Ebik in Trabzon. No traces are left of Armenians. It's a nice city. It's a dynamic city on the edge of the mountain in front of the Black Sea, but it does not have Armenian character anymore. The three churches, the school, and so on that are mentioned in the book, they don't physically appear there. The only thing left is the Vang, the monastery on the top of the hill with beautiful frescoes with Armenian writings on them. It's there. And again, Surmelian in his book refers to that Vang as well. So it connects all these nice pieces that don't exist physically today, but from his memoir, you can live again the life of Trabzon there. Ashot Zoryan, while spent his childhood, his first 10 years in Trabzon, but he went through a similar journey. He went through villages. His mother left him in one of the villages 2 years with a Kurdish family, and then traveled to Batumi, to Sukhumi. Similar journey that Susan was mentioning about Surmelian. So a path where the east side of the Black Sea was a refuge. The Russian communities were refuge for the orphans initially. Then he ended up in Istanbul. He ended up in Getronagan. He ended up in the same orphanage where Leon Surmelian was. And that's where the friendship comes. And I haven't known that part. And as we were reading the book, phase by phase with my wife, I was going and finding out documents. I was going finding out the biography of Ashot Zoryan, his photo collection, and finding out different elements of the story where Zaved Surmelian's brother, Onig, would receive the same scholarship as Ashot Zoryan, and they would travel together to Vienna to continue their studies in different fields, one in violin and music, the other one in fine arts, in painting. And their journey continues from Vienna jointly with Onig Surmelian, but it departs from the author. But there are 2 chapters in the book, as Susan was mentioning. These 2 chapters, they collide, and there's a nice description, things that I didn't know about Ashot Zoryan. He quotes of him, his way of thinking, that generation of orphans that are surviving, their resilience, their future. These are important things that I think it applies on all of us as Armenians when we read about this generation that survived, that the generation that went through those stages. And I like a comment that Richard made to me once, that is the fact that those elements of the generation went and studied things that were liberal to study. They did painting, they did music, and so on. If they were under the coverage of their families, they may not have done that. They may have studied science or something else in terms of career rather than music or painting. So maybe a benefit, but a side benefit, not a pleasant benefit. But they succeeded in their fields. Similarly, Léon Surmelian becoming such a famous writer at the end was again a nice ending to the story. Again, beautiful beginning, beautiful ending, a difficult period in the middle, but still full of humor, joyous comments, and a very descriptive, very beautiful description of every moment of that journey. I'm afraid that a film may not capture all that. We're talking about the possibility of a film. Reading the book and in English will be really a special joy for all of you. For me, it was extra special because of the family connections that I discovered through it. And with that, I'll end my short intervention.
Thank you, Yervant. It was so special. I remember you sent me an email quite late at night. We have this 12-hour difference with family pictures, and I opened it's familiar faces, and you said it's my uncle. It's absolutely heartwarming to see how these little boys, how resilient they were.
Yeah,
and how talented, how
must
brave.
have been so valuable for them to keep the pictures in his collection, to publish the pictures. These are teenage years, right? When they were together in Istanbul, and we have the photos of that teenage years kept and passed on to the rest of the family now.
What I found interesting that you were saying, reading it, you could just recognize Ashot, his character, and he's quite a character. He was the heartthrob. Susan said he was the Apollo of the group. So. Yeah.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot for the opportunity and for me to discover more about my family. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tatevik. Maybe we will get to question-answer session, part of our session. Dear participants, please, your questions.
You can type your questions either in the chat section, or you can just unmute yourself and ask your questions. You're welcome to. We are looking forward to read many questions from you. I think we have a question in the chat. So the question is, I think you should have a movie. Any steps?
Oh, we just had this discussion in Armenian, and
yeah.
Yes, why not? If we have the funding and the resources and the script and the director, absolutely doable. But I think this question arises because the book is so visual in its descriptions. It's so vivid, like Yervant was saying, it paints such a vivid picture of Trabzon, all the beauty, all that innocent childhood surrounded by colors, sounds, smells. You can sit there. You can walk with him to Trabzon, to Chesapeake and back. You can feel how cold it was when he was in New Bazet. So yes, it's a fantastic idea. We'll think about it.
Because we have so many suggestions about having a film, you can be sure that, you know, the theaters are going to be full when you have a film, because everyone is so interested. So you can think of having a film, because the plot really, it's so amazing that I'm sure, you know, even those who do not know about the book, after watching the film, of course, they will read the book as well. Thank you so much. We have other questions as well. Let me check them. So, Dr. Zorian, we have a question for you. Had you ever met Ara? What are your memories? Have you ever met Ara? And what are your memories? And have you ever met your uncle? Dr. Zorian?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
sorry,
Doug.
because I had to charge my battery. My iPad battery is going down. Okay. Have I met Ara? I'm not sure which Ara you're referring to, but I have met my uncle. Yes, I have met Ashod. I didn't meet my grandfather, who was born in Trabzon as well. I carry his name, but I met Ashod Zoryan. Ashod Zoryan, after studying in Vienna and then Fine Arts Beaux-Arts in Rome, he decided to live in Egypt. So he was in Alexandria and Cairo, and that's where he most of his life was spent. But we used to meet him during the summers. He used to come to Lebanon to spend part of the summer with us. He came to Aleppo as well, where we used to spend our winters. So I met him many times. We went to Egypt as well. I remember during my childhood to meet him. So we're close to each other. Yes, I did meet him. He had he lost his childhood, so he had a missing component of his childhood. So he was very helpful, very playful with us during that time. So I have very vivid, beautiful memories with him, with Ashod Zoryan. True.
Wonderful. And another question related to that, we want to know if your uncle has ever mentioned about Levon Surmelian while your conversations together.
Not to me. I was a young child. My uncle died in 1970. He didn't have a perfect health because he never married. He suffered through multiple things during his life, so he died early. So I didn't have any mature discussions. I have this childhood discussion with him. But from my father, I remember that not about Levon Surmelian, but about his brother, Onyx Surmelian, when they studied together and so on. He had vivid memories of that, the collections of stories of their time in Istanbul, Constantinople, in Vienna as well. In fact, in his photo collection, I found very quickly photos of him and Onyx Surmelian together in Vienna, in Bolis, and so on. So yes, it was an important part of his life.
So much.
Could I add something to that?
Yes, Susan, please, you're welcome.
I just want to say that in addition to this wonderful serendipity, my husband, Levon Chilingirian, when I started speaking about Ashod Zoryan, he said, wait a minute, we have a painting by him in our house. And his uncle and Yervan's uncle had met, and Ashod had done a painting of Manuk Parikian, who's a violinist, probably when he was on tour in Egypt during World War II, I'm guessing. We don't know the whole story, unfortunately.
Yeah, he had such portraits of visiting dignitaries. So he had his own painting studio. It was well known there. Even the wife of the king of Egypt at the time used to go to his studio to study there. So he had paintings of people visiting, like Saroyan, like Aram Khachadurian, like Silva Gavudigian, and so on. So wherever visited Egypt at that time, he used to do the portraits. So most probably along that line, he did the same for the Parikian.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Dear friends, do we have any other questions?
Maybe I have a question about disseminating the book beyond Armenians. It's a great literary book. It has a hidden Armenian story in it, of course. It has a great message in it about our resilience, about genocide, so many facets of the Armenian life. But as it was a bestseller, not among Armenians, but in America for American readers. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about what are we doing to reach the English reading audience, not only in America, of course.
Richard, do you want to say a few words about this?
Sure, of course. It's a very good point, Yervant, as well, because clearly this did not achieve bestseller status solely on the back of sales to the Armenian community in 1940. So this was by far, this was a well-acclaimed, it was a universally recognized book. What we tried to do very early on was start introducing it to the education system as well. So any university in the United States that had an Armenian or Ottoman studies chair, okay, we reached out to them on this as well, libraries as well, and things like that. So also, our first book launch, funny enough, was at the Wiener Holocaust Library as well in London. So we are very much trying to raise the profile of this book, not just within the Armenian community, but above and beyond that, amongst people who are involved in Turkish studies, Ottoman studies, Holocaust studies, and even just a universal story of boyhood, something like this. As you rightly say, it is happening regrettably right now as we speak, whether it's in Syria, Central America, and so forth, and what's happening. So very much so. Daunt Books is another bookseller in London that is carrying it as well. And it was important for us as well to, one of the endorsements that we got, of course, was by Thomas de Waal. So we wanted other non-Armenians as well to know about this. But very good point. Yes, this was very important to get this out to the wider community there.
Yeah. I think a nice effort on this. You're doing a great job. It cannot be done only by you, of course. It should be multiple chain effects to continue taking it further. But through the universities, through academic circles, make great sense as a literary book. But just for the regular reader as well, it makes it's a very beautiful book, independent of the topic, independent of the being Trabzon or being genocide or anything that links us to it. It's a huge novel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, do we have
Anne,
other
I'm sorry,
questions?
can I ask a question to you?
Sure, Korean.
Thank you. Just wanted to say that I believe that it is related to the dissemination to the readers in the United States. Is expedient to consider this side that it is clearly shown that networking is very important. Armenians survive due to this networking because they are networking people and they are able to create networks, and this survival is now networking becomes one of the most pillars of modern people. It's very important. It can be not only disseminated as it can be considered as an example of networking, how it is possible. Probably this side could be highlighted, emphasized, and used further. This is just my short.
Absolutely. It is true. Yeah. I mean, the book is a proof of that, but the resilience of Armenians is via their network. It's not just
but it now becomes a necessity for everybody, because networking is something, a necessity in the modern life.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting angle to look at, actually. Yes, we don't emphasize it enough, perhaps, in the Armenian life, because it comes in the nature of Armenians, right? From our Silk Road days, our success was because of our network on the Silk Road. Right? In every aspect, we use that networking, and even though our post-genocide survival was all due to that. So and this book is a proof of that as well. All the points that he traveled, all the successes that the survival, and then the successes that he had is because of the network as well.
I was fascinated, just to add to it, even as a child, he's aware of the value of his family's network. Family is gone, but
yes,
as a lost child, he's walking around in Trabzon or other places, he's scanning for Greek signs or trying to hear conversation in Greek, approaching, saying, Karavetsan, and Dr. Metaxas was our family friend, and he sort of clings to this to survive. It's just incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I always say our two major assets, values that we have is networking and education. This multiculturalism, the education that our generations all over the history we gave, and the network that we gave are the two secrets of our success.
Could I just add there that I think it's one of the astonishing things that comes out is the education that they managed to keep on getting during such a terrible period. The boys go from one school to another school to a kind of wacky,
Yes.
I don't know what that you could call that, man, but they're learning something, and they're learning to be more savvy about who they trust. But they continue to learn all the way across, and sometimes formally, sometimes informally, but to them, it's already embedded in them that education is their way forward, their way out of their situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's also, I would add to this as well, that came out of it as from the vantage point of a 10-year-old boy, this sense of, if this is a word in Armenian, jarbi guchun, okay, this sort of street smarts, all right, and being able to put aside everything that you see around you and immediately establish alliances that will help you get to the next step and allow you to get to that next step without even knowing where that next step is going to be either, because there was no roadmap or anything like that. But and then eventually, even when they get to the Getron Agan and they're all now orphans in this school, they had almost adopt a new family for each other there. Yeah. So it is that street smarts and this will to survive and using that intellect that they have as well. Without getting bogged down into what is going on, the terrible things that were going on around them.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This was a wonderful journey. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Institute for being so avant-garde in pulling out this book, publishing it, and sharing it with us at large and with AVC today. It's a great thing. I think our virtual college audience, our readers, e-learners at large will really benefit from this. Thanks a lot for all your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you
very much.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for hosting this fantastic event. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I enjoyed it immensely. we all did. We learned a lot. Please visit our website as well if you want to learn more about the book. And we hope to see you again.
Yes, yes.
When we're making the film now.
Yeah.
And we have this ordered so on the Armenian Learning Zone, AVC's Learning Zone page. It will be a recorded session. So if you recommend it to somebody to look at it later, to listen to it, it's possible to do that as well. Okay, both the Armenian and the English sessions.
You're welcome to. And please do not forget that we are meeting again next week, same time, same day, Saturday, and we are going to talk about Armenian national costumes, about Taras. Thank you very much for this wonderful time, and looking forward to see you very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.